Barry Neale, welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapist podcast, and thanks for being with me here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Aidan. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much. Now, I happened to be talking to a colleague recently in the last few days, and I said, well, Barry Neale is coming on to the podcast, and their retort was, well, what Barry Neale doesn't know is not worth knowing, when it comes to hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And
Well, it varies from things like comments like that to that big head. That know-it-all. So that sounds like the better version. That's a nice reframe.
yeah. But anyway, I said, I know who you are. I mean, I've attended quite a few of your seminar webinars, on various different topics, and I found them excellent. Now, it's quite obvious to me that when you're doing putting together a program of training, you do quite a lot of research,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, all
that's
the
very
time.
evident.
I think one of the big mistakes that I see hypnotherapists making is they do one course and they think that that one course taught them everything they need to know. And
Yeah,
I've been studying hypnosis now for 48 years, and I've been an NLP trainer for 30 years and a hypnosis trainer for 30 years. And I'm always studying. I'm
yeah,
always reading books, going on courses. I've been on
yeah.
about 4 courses already this year.
Uh-huh.
So I am always studying. So if I'm putting together a program, there's a heck of a lot of work to put that program together. It can
Yeah,
take me, just for a 2 hour workshop, it might take me 3 or 4 weeks to put the manual together.
yes,
So
yes.
there's a lot of things that I do ahead of time, even though I know all these materials.
Mm.
Putting down, breaking it down into what people need to know and the sort of research
Uh,
behind it takes a bit of time. So yeah, I always put a
mm,
heck of a lot of work into these things.
yeah. And you're in my mind, you're quite known about the maybe controversial sayings, for example, that the you don't agree with the unconscious cannot process a negative. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that only NLPers and hypnotists have a problem with. The
Right.
whole of the rest of the world managed to survive quite comfortably without having to think about this. And it
Uh-huh.
comes from a misunderstanding of some of the teachings of NLP. In the early days of NLP, they said if you're going to set an outcome, the outcome needs to be positively set. So instead of saying, I don't want to have anxiety, you say, I want to be calm or I want to be confident. So there's a
Yeah.
positive internal representation of the outcome. And unfortunately, people have jumped on that and said, that means the unconscious mind cannot process a negative. And they often then use as a way of justifying that the phrase, don't think of a blue tree,
Yeah.
right? And of course,
Or a
you think
pink
of a
elephant.
blue tree, right? But my question is, what part of the mind then is focusing on the blue tree? Is it the unconscious part of the mind or the conscious part of the mind? And clearly, it's the conscious part of the mind because you're thinking of a blue tree.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it was
Uh,
unconscious, you wouldn't know it.
yes. Yes.
So, and the actual phrase, don't think of a blue tree, from a linguistic point of view, it uses what's called a presupposition of awareness. Think, the word think is a presupposition of awareness. So whatever follows it, your conscious attention gets drawn to it. So you say, don't think of a blue tree. Consciously, you start thinking of a blue tree.
Yeah.
So the unconscious mind is not even in that equation. It's about directing your conscious focus. And this is where the misconception comes. It's about directing your conscious focus. So when you say something like, I don't want to be anxious, your conscious focus is on anxiety. If you say, I want to be confident, then your conscious focus goes there. And this is what we're doing. We're directing consciousness.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with the unconscious mind.
Mhm.
My dog understands the word no really well. You know,
Yeah.
my dog can do it. I'm sure everyone else can. And the reality of life is, look, I don't know if you've ever been to New York, but if the unconscious mind couldn't process a negative, there would be thousands and thousands of New Yorkers getting run over every single day. Because on every street corner, there's a sign that says, walk, don't walk,
Yeah.
walk, don't walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just utter nonsense. There's
Enough said.
no science behind it
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah. Interesting. No,
And
it's
and I
something that
think
I want to
and I
address.
think
Go ahead.
hypnotists
Sorry.
really need to stop and think about what they're
Yeah.
repeating.
Yeah.
They often hear this from a trainer, or they read it in the book and they just parrot it back and accept it. But look at the average stage hypnotist. The average stage hypnotist will constantly, all through their show, be using negation.
Yeah.
So, for example, a simple suggestibility test. Your arm is rigid and stiff, rigid and stiff. It's so stiff you cannot bend it. You can't bend it. It's rigid and stiff. Try and bend it and find you can't bend it. And of course, they can't bend it.
Yeah.
You're telling them you can't bend it. Now, if the unconscious mind cannot process a negative, then they will be able to bend it. You can't.
Good
Your eyes
point.
are locked shut. You can't open them.
Yeah.
Your name has disappeared. You cannot say or think your name.
Yeah.
Like, people, open your eyes.
Yeah.
Start thinking critically. When someone tells you a fact like that, look for where that doesn't work, and you'll soon find very quickly that that is a load of nonsense. And it's just something, it's a misquote, and people are run with
Th-
it.
Thank you for that. I think I thought it was important to address it. You know,
Yeah, and it comes up when people are working in therapy as well, that you get someone comes in for a stop smoking session,
yeah.
right? And I've seen, and we'll probably get talking about this later on, scripts where people have created scripts and not mentioned smoking all the way through.
You
So
just preempted me, Barry.
yeah,
I was
you're
going to
now
talk
a
about scripts.
clean air breather. No one has ever come in and paid me a couple of £100 for them to become a clean air breather. They've all come in to stop smoking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And to be
Yeah.
a non-smoker. Now,
Yeah.
I'm a non-smoker, right? There's the word non in front of it. Calling myself a non-smoker has never once tempted me to smoke. And it's just nuts.
Yeah. Well, you preempted what I was going to ask you next about scripts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of problems, in my opinion, with scripts.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm really concerned, where did the idea of scripts come from in the first place? Because if you look at the two major influences in the field of hypnotherapy over the last 100 years, you look at Dave Ellman and Milton Erickson. And if you study the works of those people, they didn't use scripts. Erickson would write down a load of ideas, but he would work with the client directly. And even if he did write out some ideas, it was for that individual client. He did not use a generic script.
Yeah.
And from the first point of view, it's like, where did this come from? And basically it came from laziness and poor teaching. And the idea that hypnosis is about inducing an altered state of consciousness to bypass the critical faculty of the conscious mind and somehow program the unconscious mind without the conscious awareness. And so the idea is then you just send the conscious mind off and you read a script, and that somehow is going to magically program the unconscious part of the mind. But that's not how hypnosis works. It's not passive. Hypnosis is active. The client must be actively imagining what you're asking them to imagine. So again, if you look at the work of Dave Ellman, he would often do age regression and things like that. The client was actively participating in the session. If you watch Milton Erickson, and there's very few tapes of Erickson, but one particular one is the Mondi tape. And if you watch Mondi, who's the subject, she is in the process, and she's like one particular phrase he uses, he says, little duck splashing Mondi, to regress her to a child. And she has got big animated face, she's participating in it. It's active. So the idea that you just send the conscious mind off and you magically program the unconscious mind is just complete and utter nonsense. Then you've got the problem of oftentimes the problem that the client comes in with is not the real problem. So client comes in and says, I have anxiety. And you might pull out your trusty anxiety script that's generic. The problem might not be anxiety. The symptom might be anxiety, but the problem could be a conflict. It could be trauma. It could be anything. So you're not working with the actual real problem. Then you've got the other problem of who the heck is writing these scripts?
Yeah.
Because is it some master genius hypnotherapist who's writing all these scripts? And my experience of that is no. And you'd be surprised if I told you that I know that one of the major purveyors of script books gets people on Fiverr to write them for him. And now we've got even better. We've got people selling script books that are written by AI. So there's loads of problems with scripts. But the real thing is the client themselves is the script. You need to be working one-on-one with the client. It's therapy.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be doing therapy with the client, not just reading to them.
Yeah, and it touches, of course, very much on what Erickson would have engaged in, the utilization
Absolutely. You've got to
approach.
utilize
You know,
absolutely everything.
yeah, yeah,
And so when I go into a session, I literally have no plan. Mike Tyson is reputed to say, everyone has a plan until someone punches you in the face.
yeah,
And when you're working with clients, you go in with a plan, you're going to have a problem, because suddenly you're going to go off a complete tangent. There's something else is going to come up, and it's like, what the heck do I do here?
yeah.
And this is the problem with any type of scripted approach. And I'm horrified about some of the state of some of the hypnosis training, particularly in the UK, and I've seen it in America as well. There is, I'm not going to name the name, but there's one particular hypnotherapy training school in the UK which has certified about 25 trainers. So they've got 25 training centers around the country teaching what they call is solution focused hypnosis. And the students are taught progressive muscle relaxation inductions, which again, if we can talk about that at some point, is probably not the best solution. And then they're taught scripts and the miracle question. And they are taught that every client that they work with, and by the way, they pay £3,500 for this training, right? And they're taught that every client is going to need about 8 to 12 sessions. And in every session, they read them the same script.
Right.
The same script.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's mind-blowing. I mean, why didn't you just give them an MP3 then?
Yeah.
Because if scripts
Yeah,
worked, just give the client an MP3 and save their time.
mm-hmm.
They don't.
Yeah. I think well, from my point of view, I mean, when a client presents themselves to you, as you said, you don't know who that client is. Well, you've taken intake, and then you ask them what the problem, but you don't know the problem they had before they arrived, or maybe a
No.
couple of days beforehand. So, and you don't necessarily know how that client is representing that problem to themselves in their own mind.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I work a lot with people with anxiety and depression and trauma. I can't begin to tell you how many people who've booked in and said they want to come to see me for depression. And when they come in, I find out it's not depression, they're just bored.
yeah,
That's the problem. I've had other people phone up and say, I need to come to see you for something innocuous like stop smoking or nail biting. And that's what's in the diary. And then they come in the door and they say, look, I've got a confession to make. I don't really want to come to see you about stop smoking. It's actually I'm impotent, but
right.
I didn't want to say that over the phone. It's like, what do you do now? Still
Yeah,
reading
yeah,
the stop smoking script?
yeah. Where's my script?
That's it.
Yeah,
And so often this will happen. You know,
yeah,
the problem and the one of the there's a quote that's often misquoted by therapists, and the quote is, "The problem is not the problem." Now that's true. So that part of it is true, but the full quote comes from someone called Paul Václavic in the
yeah,
book called Change,
yeah,
and he said, "The problem is not the problem. The problem is how the client is trying to solve the problem. That's the problem."
yeah, yeah.
And so when you understand that, then the surface level of what they're presenting as the problem is just not the problem.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
There's also the fact that it's generic. Um, and if we're working with clients and we want to be effective, we need to find out about them and the problem itself, because problems um, occur in a specific context. And the script readers don't seem to quite get this. So, for example, someone comes in and says, I have anxiety.
yeah,
Now, if you accept that presupposition, I have anxiety or I am anxious, the assumption there is that they're anxious all the time, but they're not.
mhm,
People aren't anxious all the time. They'll tell you they are, but they're really not. They're not anxious while they're sitting there watching TV. They're not anxious when they're sitting there having the breakfast cereal. Probably they're not anxious when they're taking the dog for a walk. The problem occurs in a specific context. And every single every single 90% of the problems you will see will be some version of the equation of when X client either does or feels Y. So it's a
yeah,
cause and effect equation.
mhm,
And so that problem occurs in a specific context.
yeah,
Within that specific context, there is a specific trigger that is specific to that person. And the next client comes along, it's going to be a different trigger.
yeah, yeah,
That trigger triggers an emotion. And when that person is in that particular emotion, they behave in a certain way. And so we need, if we're going to be real therapists, we need to identify what is the context where this occurs. What is the specific trigger? And the trigger is going to be, it's going to come in through one of the senses. So it's either going to be something they see, either external from themselves or internal, like an internal memory. Um, it's either going to be an auditory trigger. So it could be, again, something they hear, maybe something someone says or the sound of a dog barking, or it could be something they're saying to themselves. And those are the two primary ones, visual or auditory. Occasionally it could be kinesthetic, so it could be a sense of touch, you know, particularly if you're working with people who've been abused at some point, certain times when they're touched in a certain way, that can cause that reaction. And very, very rarely it might be the smell of something that will trigger them. I don't know. Smells are really powerful. I mean, I
yeah,
remember many, many years ago when I was looking for a new house, and I went to see this old house, beautiful old house, which was owned by an old lady. And the moment I walked through the door, it smelled like my nan,
yeah.
and all these wonderful feelings come back.
Yes,
So the
yes,
trigger in that was olfactory, but it's not. usual that that's the situation. And it could be the sense of taste, but it's very unlikely. So typically it's visual, auditory, and possibly kinesthetic
Yeah.
as a trigger, which could be internal or external. And if you must find that out, because if you don't, what are you attaching the change to? And
Yeah.
what can happen is if you just, a client comes in and says, I have anxiety or whatever it is, and you think, right, okay, I know what to do. I'll pull out my PMR induction and my handy anxiety script. You'll relax the client. They will have a nice, pleasant experience. They might feel more confident at the end of the session. But that change hasn't been attached to anything in real life. It's not attached to the problem context. So they'll come out and they'll feel great. They'll feel really relaxed. They've had a nice, relaxing experience, but it'll be about as much use as a massage.
Yeah.
It'll make them feel better for a while, but the change hasn't been attached to the context of the trigger. And you see this a lot, not just in like, I mean, with hypnosis and scripts. You see this if you've ever been to something like a Tony Robbins seminar. Now, Tony Robbins does like 3 or 4 days where they do this rah, 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 go Tony type thing, gets people in real peak emotional states. And during that workshop, they feel unstoppable.
Yeah.
And they come away going, oh my God, that was the best weekend of my life. 2 weeks later, they're back at work, still being triggered by all the things they were triggered by, because that positive emotion had never been attached to anything. Mm-hmm. So this is why we need to be specific. We need to find the context, the trigger. What is the emotion that's being triggered? What's the behavior? And then we need to intervene. Once we found that trigger, once we found that X, we need to find out, okay, how do they want to be instead? And give that to them. Mm-hmm. So currently you got a trigger that says when X, client feels Y. So the solution is when X happens, it triggers not Y. So in anything other than the current thing. And obviously, ideally, we want it to be resourceful. And so we want to get the person into a completely resourceful state that if they were to go into that resourceful state, it would make it impossible for them to feel bad in that context. And when we condition it in over and over and over and over again. And so this is what we really need to be doing as therapists, is to, the hardest part of being a therapist really is identifying the context and the trigger. That's the most difficult part. Once you've got that, it's really easy, because all you need to know is how do they want to feel instead, identify those states, gain access to them in one way or another, either by having them go back to times when they felt like that in the past, or role modeling someone who's already got that state, and make that state really big and powerful and resourceful. And as they're in that state, we take them back to the context and the trigger, and we link the two things together and condition it in. And so what will then happen is the original stimuli that caused the negative response will now trigger the new response. Because here's the thing, we can never change the stimuli outside of ourselves, right?
No.
So we need to change our response to it. And this is how we do it. So if we do that over and over again, we can get profound change really, really with almost the precision of a surgeon, because we know where to intervene.
Yeah. So everything, well, I maintain, this is me talking, that everything is contextual. Everything happens in a context.
Absolutely.
And you have to, work within the context. And something I find useful, Barry, is that I like to challenge the client's model of the world. They say, we say anxiety. Well, I would say, well, do you have it 24 hours a day? And sometimes to introduce humor, I'd say, well, do you have it when you're sitting on the toilet?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is the thing, you want to challenge the generalization. Because as long as they think they either take it on as an identity level statement, like I am an anxious person, or I have anxiety. It's like it's 24 hours a day. It's like it's through time, and it just isn't. And I mean, I will say to them, okay, and a client says, I have anxiety. And I'll say, okay, great. Give me an example of when you have that. Well, I have it all the time. I'm anxious all the time. And I go, great. So it won't be difficult for you to give me one specific example in this
Yeah.
last week where you've had anxiety. Well, I could do that. I said, go on then, give me one specific example. And then they'll get that. So now I'm finding the context.
Mm.
But people will always tell you that they haven't got the very things that they're after. You know, the person who comes in and says, I don't have any confidence. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm sure I don't have any confidence. Are you confident about that? Yes, I am.
Oh,
They demonstrate it, you know.
yeah.
So we always have these resources available in other situations. You know, I've had
Yeah.
loads of clients who say, I don't have any confidence. And then you ask them about their life. What do they do? What are the hobbies they do? I had a guy some years ago who his presenting problem was he couldn't talk to women. He got really nervous, couldn't talk to women, couldn't walk across a room or a bar or whatever and talk to a woman. Says, I don't have any confidence. Started talking to him about what does he like to do. He's a professional skier. Now he chucks himself off the side of a mountain with 2 planks of wood tied to his feet. And he's telling me he doesn't have any confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So,
He's got confidence in that context.
yes.
And all we
Yeah.
needed to do was get him associated to that confidence and how that feels and take
Map
that
it
into the
across. Yeah.
context where he needs it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people have this all the time. And I do this. I have people who, say, for example, they have anxious thoughts,
Yeah.
like health anxiety or something. So they have a negative thought about, oh my God, I could be dying. And they come to a therapist thinking that they need some sort of special technique, special method to deal with that thought.
Mm.
Well, I'll change the subject and I say, like, how well do you fly? Do you fly? And they go, yeah, I fly. You know, I quite like going on holidays. Oh, okay. When you fly, have you ever had the thought, well, maybe the plane might crash? And I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm a comfortable flyer. I don't have a problem flying. But I have had the odd thought of, what if the plane crashes? Yeah. Right? We have
And some
that thought.
turbulence.
We all have them, you know. But
Yeah.
as fast as that thought pops in your mind,
It's gone.
it's gone.
Mm.
So what technique do we use?
Yeah.
None. Do we have to do some tapping to get rid of that? No. Do we have to take deep breaths to deal with that? Do we have to use distraction techniques? Oh. But the person who's got a fear of flying, they're convinced that people like you and I don't have a negative thought about flying ever. And they think that they must need a technique. But the reality is, we don't have a technique. And when you're working with someone, if you can draw attention to the fact that there are other situations in their life where they have a negative thought, but it doesn't bother them, then they suddenly realize, you know what, this is just thinking. You give them 3 or 4 examples of where they might have a negative thought, but it doesn't bother them. Then they suddenly realize, hang on a minute. I really don't need a special technique. All I need to realize is it's just a thought. And you can start working with them that because it's all contextual.
Yeah.
The problem
Yeah.
is in a specific context, and there's a
Yeah.
trigger within that. And if we work with that, we can get so much better change. And because we're working one-on-one with the actual client, and it's makes change so much better, so much quicker, and far more permanent.
And that's what it's all about. It's, you know, the quickest and most pain-free way of eliciting that change and helping the client to do that. So, in essence, are scripts useful?
I would suggest that written scripts that you'd buy in a script book are of no use whatsoever. What I would suggest is that you need training in understanding how to elicit the problem strategies. And if you're watching another therapist, then working with a client, then what I've done, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've done this with people like Richard Bandler. I've sat there on a video and transcripted what he did to do a linguistic analysis on what he did. But I'm not going to take that transcript and read it to one of my clients. I'm just going to analyze what he's actually doing one-on-one with the client to have a greater understanding of what a top therapist is actually. But I don't think, I certainly, when I teach hypnotherapy, I do not teach scripts.
No.
I think there's, and again, it gets complicated because, again, with even inductions, that people think they need a scripted induction.
Yeah.
Again, you're not paying attention to your client. It's a limitation. And then what do you do if someone is in a situation, and let's say you're not in your office, or if you've got all your scripts on your computer and your computer goes down, what do you do? Like, yikes.
All the more reason, Barry, that you whatever the client presents to you or how they present themselves, that you utilize uh, that whatever they gave you and use that as your trance work. If you're doing trance work.
Yeah, I will utilize everything. And oftentimes when the person describes the problem to you, if you're asking the right questions, they will tell you exactly what you need to do to solve the problem.
Yeah. If you listen.
If you're
Yeah.
really listening,
Yeah.
they will tell you exactly what you need to do.
Yeah.
They will say something. I often hear people say, I've got this problem that I just can't seem to get any distance from.
Yeah.
I know from that straight away that the problem is a visual representation.
Yeah.
And it's right up close to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the solution is going to be pushing that internal representation away from them
Yeah.
and making it small.
And
and other times people will come in and go, I'm really in two minds about this. I don't know what to do. Okay, we got a conflict.
yeah.
So they'll tell you what you need to do if you can pay attention and you listen. But if you've got your head buried in your script book,
yes,
you're going to miss this. And then it comes, well, what then are you going to use for suggestions? Well, the client will give you those as well. Because if you say to them, okay, well, how do you want to feel instead? You'll start getting the resources of how they want to feel. And if you bring them, like, so for example, a person says, well, I want to be really confident. So I'll write down confident because they leaned on the word confident. There was emphasis on that. Now, words in and of themselves are anchors for experience. So the person used the word confident. I know the way they said it fires off that feeling inside of them. They go, great. What's it like? What does it feel like in your body when you feel confident? And they go, oh man, it just feels really, really awesome. I mean, I feel amazing. Awesome, amazing. Those words are anchors for their experience. All I've got to do is feed back those words to them and they become natural anchors. And this is one of the reasons why you can do therapy over conversationally or over Zoom, for example, and you can do anchoring over Zoom because you do it conversationally. You find their semantically packed words and fire them back to them when they're in that context. So imagine yourself in that context now and you see that whatever and you feel awesome and it's just amazing. And they go, big smile on their face.
Yeah.
The anchors fire off.
And you were talking there about, listening. And by listening, you gather rich information, as I call it.
Yeah.
And that rich information, you mentioned there about a conflict. And that sort of brings me into, segues into the whole area of parts therapy.
Yeah.
And, so maybe you just speak to the whole area of parts and what your take on parts therapy is, please.
Sure. Now, my thoughts on parts therapy have changed dramatically over the years. And whilst we talk about the concept of parts, we need to understand it's just a model and people don't actually have parts. And the moment we start introducing a part of you does this or part of you does that, we can create more incongruence in the client. We see this with just from the point of view of conscious and unconscious, because that's just a model as well. You know, there isn't really a separate part of the mind called the unconscious mind with a little homunculus doing all the controls, right? It's just a model. And so even just creating the separation between conscious and unconscious, you'll often hear people go, I just unconsciously sabotage myself. They've created incongruence in themselves. Rather than saying, right, I'm going to do this, they give themselves an excuse. So you have to be very, very carefully think. And one of the big problems with parts therapy, particularly in some of the models that are out there, like ego state therapy and IFS, is they are installing parts in the person. They're literally installing the parts. If you have someone in hypnosis and say, I want to talk to the part of you that does X, you just installed the part that does X. If you then say, even worse, okay, and what's your name? My name's John. Oh, okay, are you male or female? You are further installing parts. And this can be a real problem. And most people aren't aware of some of the history of hypnosis. Many years ago, there used to be something called multiple personality disorder. We don't call it that anymore. Why don't we call it that anymore? Because of the controversy in the 80s and 90s about it. Now, this is a really interesting book. It's quite rare and it's quite expensive. It's called Making Monsters by Richard Offshea. And Richard Offshea was a researcher on false memory syndrome and multiple personality. And what he discovered in the second part of the book, the first part of age regression and the problems of false memory are like horrendous. I mean, it ruined people's families and lives. People ended up in prison for things they never did because of well-meaning therapists going after child abuse that never happened. But in the book, he talks about parts therapy. And he could not find, and this is one of the top researchers, very well-respected researcher, he could not find a single case of multiple personality that existed before the client went into therapy. Now, I want you to think about that.
Yeah.
And he even interviewed people and said, like, no, I didn't have this issue before I went into therapy. In fact, the therapist separated these things off. And the whole concept of multiple personality fell into real disrepute in the 90s, and which is now why we don't hear of it, and it's called dissociated identity disorder now, because no one has a multiple personality unless it's been installed by the therapist. So whenever we start going in and doing ego state therapy and we start separating the client off into this part and that part, we run the risk of creating more incongruence, not less incongruence. And we want our clients to be congruent. So when I do parts therapy, I will always integrate the part at the end of the session. So I will use models like the visual squash that will take these two, separate the conflict out and integrate it. Or I'll use one of my favorite techniques, which is the core transformation process, which again finds out what the intention is of the particular thing that's going on, but integrates it. So at the end of the session, the client is more congruent, not less congruent. And the big problem with parts and I've seen very top therapists in the field of hypnosis claiming that, for example, if you walk into a room and forget why you went in there, it's because you clicked into another part. And I'm going like, no, you're just forgetful. It's like, but literally, so there's a part for this, there's a part for that. And on some of these Facebook groups. I saw one recently in the last month or so. Some poor woman had lost her dog. Her dog had died, and she was grieving for her dog. And she wondered if hypnosis could be used to help her get back in a connection with the dog in some way, to help her feel better. And some helpful therapist said, well, what you need to do is to talk to the part of you that's the dog. And I'm thinking, there's
Right.
no, or the part of you that remembers the dog. No,
Right.
it's like you're creating a problem.
Yeah. Complicating it.
You're solving
Yeah.
people's problems, not adding to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So whenever you separate a person off and say, I'd like to speak to the part of you that does this, and particularly if you name it and give it a gender, you are creating massive incongruence in that person, which they may then use later on to justify why they're doing a particular bad behavior. Oh, that's not me. That's bad, Eric.
Yeah. Dangerous,
And then not
dangerous
taking
area, Barry.
responsibility. And so
Yeah.
my goal is for people to be a cause of everything that happens in their life. We live in this idea of cause and effect, and most clients come in at the effect side of the equation. Oh,
Yeah.
poor
Yeah.
me, it's all this other stuff that's making me
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
I want to take them over to the cause so that they are at cause for everything that happens in their life, so
Yeah.
that they can be the one who changes it, so that they don't need a therapist after that, so that they are responsible. They take responsibility. Things
This
go
is,
not
yeah.
their fault, but they have the responsibility to change it.
This is really important in my mind, what you've just said, because it's something that I harp on a lot about. That, a simple thing is I always use the metaphor of the remote control. Where is your remote control? Do you have it, or is that force outside of yourself? Have you given it away?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that you really need to bring it back into yourself where you press your own buttons, as it were, as you say, be at cause,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And this is really what we want to be doing with our clients, is to get them to be at cause for things that
Yeah.
happen in their life. And there will be things that happen in their life externally to them. And
Yeah.
it may not be their fault, but it's damn well sure their responsibility of dealing with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you've had a bad childhood, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility now as an adult to choose how that affects you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think we don't want to be creating more incongruence in the client.
No.
Even
Or
just,
overcomplicating things. Yeah.
yeah, even the simple idea of just having a conscious or a subconscious is creating incongruence. I'd really like to do that, but unconsciously, I can't do it. Yeah, you can. You're just making excuses.
Yeah.
But this is what we do. And so
Yeah.
anytime you introduce a split, you are creating incongruence in the mind of the client.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I suppose that's probably your trademark, where you keep things simple and you do no nonsense. It's straightforward. And I remember you mentioning before about, the hypnotic voice. You don't even indulge in anything like that.
No, well, this again goes back to what is hypnosis.
Yeah.
And I think this is important for people to understand. Most, virtually all schools of hypnosis only teach the theory that hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness or a trance or a state of deep relaxation. They completely ignore 200 years of research that says that's not the case.
Yeah.
Because going back right to the time of when Benjamin Franklin exposed mesmerism as being nothing more than a placebo, there's a growing body of researchers that have said that hypnosis is not a state. And this is what's called the non-state theory of hypnosis. But
Yeah.
outside of the world of academia, this is very rarely taught to hypnotherapists. But there's a whole lot of researchers, from Sabin to TX Barber to Nick Chavez to Graham Wagstaff to Irving Kirsch, who say that hypnosis is not an altered state of consciousness, has nothing to do with trance or relaxation. that in fact, and the best definition I've ever heard of hypnosis comes from Sabin, and he says hypnosis is nothing more than a suspension of disbelief and believed in imaginings. Now, that to me makes the most sense, because that's exactly how clients create their problems. They start imagining something and they forget they're imagining.
Yeah.
And it becomes believed imaginings. So as an example, I often use this example because it was such a graphic example for me. I had a young man who was getting married. The wedding was about 3 months away. And he was having panic attacks and sleepless nights over having to give the speech at the wedding. And he sits in my chair opposite me, and I say, "What's running through your mind when you think about giving the speech at your wedding?" And he said, "Oh my God," he said, "I imagine sitting at the top table. I've got my bride next to me, and I'm sitting there shuffling my notes really, really nervously, and like my heart is racing, and I can hear the master of ceremonies behind me, and he's about to call my name, and I'm absolutely crapping myself." And he said, then he calls my name, and I have to stand up, and my legs are shaking, and I can't breathe, I can't speak. And then I'm looking out at the audience, and everyone's looking at me with these big bug eyes. And as he's telling me this, he's starting to go into a panic attack. And I went, wait, stop. Have a look around the room. Where are you? Oh, yeah. Suddenly he realizes he's in my office in Essex.
Yeah.
What's happened there? He started to imagine something.
Yeah.
He started to forget he was imagining it. And suddenly it's becoming real. And you know this thing where we say that the body or the mind cannot tell the difference between a real or an imagined experience. Well, this is what was happening.
Yeah.
He started to imagine he was actually giving the speech at his wedding. He forgot he was imagining it. And as a result, he was feeling all the fear if he'd actually been doing it. So that's how a client does their problems. The person who was traumatized by something that happened 10 years ago, you ask them about their problem, they start going back into it, and they
reliving
start
it,
sobbing and whatever.
They're
forgetting that they're imagining it. They think it's all happening over again because they're creating this image in the mind so vividly. So people create their problems by using their imagination and forgetting that they're imagining. Hypnosis is exactly the same. And the purest example of real hypnosis is the lemon test. Right? You know, the standard lemon test. That's an example of pure hypnosis. And it fits the definition that Sabin gave of a suspension of disbelief and believed in imaginings. Because what do? You say to the client, okay, I want you to imagine in either your left or right hand a lemon. Now, they know there's not a lemon there. So at that point, they got to suspend that disbelief. Okay, I'll play along. Okay, and then you start describing the lemon, you know, bright colors, feel the weight of it, whatever. Imagine taking a knife and cutting it in half, and they get so absorbed in what they're imagining, they start to forget that they're imagining, and then saliva starts forming in their mouth. That's pure hypnosis. No induction, no relaxation, nothing. And so hypnosis, as far as I'm concerned, has nothing to do with trance, relaxation, or an altered state of consciousness. Therefore, we don't need to do a relaxing voice because it's nothing to do with relaxation. What we need to do is be congruent. And if we want to emphasize certain words, we absolutely do that. But one of I did a lot of NLP training back in the early 90s, and it was all about the Ericksonian stuff, and everyone talked in a gravelly voice. And then I went on a training with an American hypnotist called Don Mottin. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Don, but he was big in the NGH in America. Don Mottin is like Tony Robbins on speed. If you've ever heard Tony Robbins speak, Don Mottin can beat him. And he would do his hypnosis sessions really fast. You know, and the one of the things that's often you often hear that many people have now used is the color red post-hypnotic suggestion at the end. That comes from Don. And he would say, I want you to think about the color red, 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 red. the color red, red, red is going to be brighter, sharper, more vivid to you than ever before in your life. You know, whether that be a stoplight color bus, it might be as small as the latest nail polish, as large as double-decker bus. Each and every time you discover the color red, that's how fast he was speaking. And I'm going, what? So again, I changed my mind. And as soon as I realized that, and that hypnosis is not an altered state of consciousness, not a trance. And I get in a lot of arguments with people over this because they're so welded to this idea that hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness or trance. And it just amazes me that the hypnotists are in the field of changing people's minds, but they don't want to change their own.
Interesting.
They
Good
don't
point.
want to open up to new theories. But the real thing is, if people really believe that hypnosis is a trance state, there's an American stage hypnotist called Kreskin. Now, Kreskin was really big in the 70s. Now, he was a stage hypnotist and a mentalist, and he used to do the standard stage hypnosis show with the induction and selection of clients and whatever, and then do all the skits and whatever. And one particular day, for whatever reason, the show was running late, and he thought, I need to cut some corners here, otherwise we're not going to get through it. So he omitted the induction. So he brought people on stage, did the selection process, all the arms and whatever, and didn't do induction. It didn't affect the show one bit. He then started questioning what the heck's going on here then. From that moment on, he never uses an induction in his stage hypnosis shows. And he sided with these non-state theorists, and he put up £100,000 wager to anybody, including the researchers in the ivory tower.
Oh, yes.
I'll pay you $100,000 if you can prove that hypnosis is a trance state. He still has his money 40 years later. And the offer is still there because he's on Facebook. He's still around.
It's a fast. Sorry, go ahead.
So really, the hypnosis can be used to create an altered state of consciousness. It can be used to create relaxation. It can use to create trance. But hypnosis itself isn't that. Because a skilled hypnotist who's skilled with waking hypnosis can create all the so-called deep trance phenomena like analgesia, amnesia, positive, negative hallucinations in a normal waking state. All of them. Now, if that's the case, what's the purpose of a deep state of hypnosis? What's the deep part about? So the reality is, there are levels of relaxation, but there's no depth of hypnosis. Hypnosis is either they're following the instructions or they're not. And certainly some of the research on depth, when people have gone to, I think there's some various techniques where you take the person deeper and deeper. What you're actually doing is relaxing them more. That's not more hypnosis, that's more relaxation. And in fact, the more they relax, the less responsive they are to suggestions. And the proof of that is if you've deepened someone through the floor, you say, all right, in a moment, I'm going to count from 5 to 1 on the count of 1, your eyes are open, and they don't open their eyes. They're saying, screw you, I'm really enjoying this, I'm going to be down here. So they're not responding to suggestions anymore.
Absolutely.
They have hypnosis, they just have deep relaxation, which they're thoroughly enjoying.
Barry, you're such an encyclopedic mind and brain of knowledge and wonderful facts and wonderful experiences that we could go on talking all day here. And thank you so much for
you're welcome.
your time in helping me record this podcast.
So I just want to add to one little point on that so that people understand where I'm coming from. The purpose of it, so I don't necessarily say that, well, what are you doing with hypnosis? Do you need a hypnotic induction? In my opinion, the purpose of the hypnotic induction is not to induce an altered state of consciousness. The purpose of the induction is nothing more than a ritual to install belief and expectancy. Because
Excellent point.
Irving Kirsch, the top researcher in the field of hypnosis, calls hypnosis a non-deceptive mega placebo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what it is. Hypnosis itself is a non-deceptive mega placebo. So we are installing belief and expectancy. That's the purpose of the induction. So the best inductions are not the PMR inductions. The best inductions are the ones with tests and convincers built in that prove hypnosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're the best ones.
A wonderful way to end this podcast, in the knowledge that there is a vast ocean of discoverings and things to be learned,
Yeah.
to add on to that. Now, Barry, how can we contact you? How can clients contact you?
Sure.
And I know you have a presence on YouTube and you have a members area on YouTube, which is excellent
Yes.
also. So tell us
Yeah.
about that,
So I've
please.
got there's probably about 350, nearly 400 videos on
Yeah,
my YouTube channel,
yeah,
and at least 120 on the private members section,
yeah.
which is a ridiculously low price. I mean, it's about from $4.99 to $8.99 a month.
Yeah,
And
it's only €10.
yeah, I mean, it's just there's hundreds of hours of
Yeah,
video on
yeah,
there. Also, I have a website which is changeworksacademy.com.
yeah,
And on there, I've got loads of courses, including a complete, what I call the Accelerated Change Therapist course,
yeah,
which is a complete hypnosis course, an NLP practitioner course, and also training in EFT and eye movement integration, amongst other things. And
yeah,
it comes with all the applications of how to work with weight loss, smoking, depression, pain, all those sorts of things, and certification as an NLP
yeah.
practitioner and a hypnotherapist as well. So all those are on there at the moment. And so that changeworksacademy .com, that's
.com.
me. Yeah.
Excellent.
And I'm always
Do you want
happy
to?
if people want to email me and ask me questions.
Yeah,
I also do private mentoring, which over the years has become more popular because people have got fed up with traveling to courses and they'd rather just pay someone for the advice.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that works really, really well because, and it's not like you get tied into some long, there's some mentoring programs out there that are really long, like 12 months program, and they charge them about £8,000 or something. And I'm like,
Yes.
God, it's nothing like that.
No.
My program's really simple.
Yeah.
And it's relatively cheap. I don't charge any more than I do my private clients. And so,
And I just say I would highly recommend Barry's courses. No nonsense, straightforward stuff that works. So
yeah,
highly recommend that. Barry Neale, thank you so much for your time, your valuable time, and indeed your expertise and your courtesy and your kindness in talking to me here today.
oh, it's been my pleasure, Aidan. Great to see you.
Take care. Bye bye. Until next
Bye now.
time.
Bye.